Chapter 8. The Final Vision. Sleep had become impossible. For 3 nights, Liam lay beside Clara, listening to her peaceful breathing, while his mind churned with increasingly desperate plans. Each scheme seemed more hopeless than the last. Moving to another country, hiding Clara somewhere, the casket couldn't find her, even considering having her committed to a psychiatric facility where she'd be safe from his own hands. But deep down, he knew none of it would work. The casket had shown him Clara's death with the same inexorable certainty it had revealed his grandfather's drowning and his father's burning. The vision would come to pass exactly as prophesied, and no amount of running or hiding would change that fundamental truth. On the fourth morning after destroying and witnessing the casket's supernatural restoration, Liam made his decision. He needed to see the vision one more time, needed to study every detail until he understood exactly how Clara would die. Only by knowing the precise mechanism could he hope to find some way to subvert it. Clara had left early for a faculty meeting, kissing him goodbye with the same loving smile she'd worn for 4 years of marriage. Her trust was absolute, her affection genuine. She had no idea that the man she'd pledged her life to was destined to become her killer. "I love you," she'd whispered at the door, straightening his collar with those gentle hands he was prophesied to destroy. "I love you too," he'd replied, and meant it more desperately than she could possibly know. Now the house stood empty around him as he descended to the basement for what he hoped would be the final time. The casket waited in its corner, patient and malevolent, ready to reveal whatever fresh horror it had prepared for his consumption. Liam's hands no longer shook as he approached. 3 months of supernatural visions had numbed him to the basic terror of opening the lid. What remained was a cold, analytical determination to decode the casket's message completely. The lid opened with its familiar creak. Clara lay inside, but the vision had evolved since he'd last seen it. The brutalization was more extensive now, more detailed in its savage specificity. Her beautiful face was so swollen and discolored that she was barely recognizable. Both eyes had been blackened, her nose clearly broken, her lips split and bleeding. Dark finger marks encircled her throat like a grotesque necklace. But it was the defensive wounds that made Liam's stomach clench with recognition. Clara's hands were torn and bloody, her fingernails broken from clawing at her attacker. Her arms bore long scratches where she tried to protect herself, and her torn clothing suggested a desperate struggle that had lasted far too long. This wasn't a quick death born of sudden rage. This was prolonged, methodical violence, the kind that came from someone who had lost all connection to sanity and humanity. As Liam studied the vision, details emerged that he'd missed in his previous horrified glances. Clara's wedding ring was missing, torn from her finger during the struggle. Her teacher's badge lay beside her body, the cheerful photo ID a stark contrast to her brutalized corpse. Most chilling of all, her eyes held not just accusation but a deep, heartbroken betrayal, the look of someone who had died knowing her killer intimately. The vision was showing him exactly what he feared most, himself as a monster, Clara as his victim, their love story ending in the most violent possible way. But as he forced himself to maintain eye contact with Clara's battered face, Liam noticed something that made his breath catch. In her dead eyes, behind the accusation and betrayal, was something else. Desperate urgency, as if she was trying to communicate some vital message across the barrier between life and death. "Stop this," her expression seemed to plead. "Don't let this happen. Fight it." The realization hit him like lightning. The casket wasn't just showing him Clara's death, it was showing him a choice. The vision was both prophecy and warning, revealing what would happen if he allowed the supernatural influence to continue corrupting his mind and soul. His grandfather and father had both been driven to madness by the casket's power. Walter had been murdered, but by whom? Frank had died in a fire that seemed to target him specifically. The pattern suggested that each generation of Carter men eventually turned on their own families, consumed by whatever malevolent force inhabited the cursed object. The casket was a corruption engine, designed to transform loving husbands and fathers into killers. It fed on the destruction of families, growing stronger with each generation it claimed. And now it was working on him, slowly eroding his sanity until the day he would fulfill the vision it had shown him. But unlike his predecessors, Liam had seen the end result. He knew exactly what the casket wanted him to become, which meant he still had the power to choose a different path. Standing over Clara's prophesied corpse, Liam Carter made the most important decision of his life. He would not become a monster. He would not allow the casket to transform him into Clara's killer. Whatever supernatural force had claimed his grandfather and father would stop with him, even if it meant sacrificing everything he held dear. The plan that crystallized in his mind was both elegant and terrible. If the casket required Clara's death to complete its cycle, he would give it what it wanted, but none in the way it expected. The vision showed Clara murdered by her husband, brutalized by the man who claimed to love her. But what if that man wasn't Lamb? What if he found someone else to play the role? The thought was monstrous, but it offered the only possible escape from an impossible situation. Clara would die, that seemed inevitable now, but perhaps he could ensure her death served a purpose beyond the casket's malevolent hunger. If he was careful, if he planned meticulously, he might be able to save her soul even if he couldn't save her life. Liam closed the casket and climbed the basement stairs, his mind already working through the logistics of what he was contemplating. It would require careful preparation, precise timing, and a level of cold calculation that the old Liam would never have possessed. But the old Liam had died the first time he opened the casket. What remained was something harder, more focused, shaped by months of supernatural revelation and the terrible knowledge of what was coming. He spent the day in his office at the university, ostensibly grading papers, but actually researching missing persons cases and unsolved murders. The casket had taught him that death was simply a transition, that the end of physical existence was just the beginning of something greater. Clara's transition would be peaceful and purposeful, not the savage brutalization shown in his vision. That evening, Clara noticed his improved mood immediately. "You seem better," she observed over dinner, "more like yourself. I was starting to worry that losing your father had affected you more than you were letting on." "I think I'm finally accepting it," Lamb replied, which was true in ways she couldn't understand. Debt is just part of life. We can't fight it, but we can choose how we face it. Clara smiled and reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm proud of you for working through your grief. It shows real strength." Her touch felt electric, charged with significance. He was only beginning to understand. Soon, very soon, he would prove just how strong he'd become. The casket had shown him Clara's death, but it hadn't shown him the circumstances leading up to it. That part of the story was still his to write. After Clara went to bed, Liam returned to the basement one final time. The caskets laid open to reveal the same brutalized vision, unchanged in its terrible detail. But now he looked at it with different eyes, not as an inevitable future, but as a challenge to be overcome through superior planning and execution. "You want her dead," he whispered to the malevolent presence he could feel radiating from the ancient wood. "If you won't get the satisfaction of making me the killer, I'll find another way." Clara's battered face stared back at him, those dead eyes still pleading for salvation. And for the first time since inheriting the cursed object, Liam Carter smiled. He was going to give her exactly what she was asking for.